Hi, I'm Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Christy, and we work with Globe International.
Working with missionaries, we hear stories of the struggles, the humor, God's goodness, and a little side of crazy.
Hey, that's who we are.
This is Crazy Missionary Stories. Hello and welcome back to Crazy Missionary Stories. Today we are interviewing Bryan Ost, who has been on the mission field for pretty much all of his life. So will you tell us what you're currently doing?
I'm the senior associate pastor at Generation Church in downtown Pensacola, and I'm loving it. One of the main roles I have is leading the worship team, which I've been doing since I've been here. Lindsay is on the team actually, and it's just pure joy. It's a joy. It's a job I love to do. So yeah.
That's awesome. I can tell you love to do it because you're a great leader. All right, so you've been serving on the mission field pretty much all of your life. So will you take us back to, you said you were 1 when you went to the mission field, right?
Yes. Well, my whole family, it's been kind of mission field to mission field. It actually started with my great-grandfather in Sweden, who moved to Alaska to be a missionary specifically. And then from Alaska, my grandfather becoming a missionary to Mexico, and I'm going fast. And my dad, who was raised in Mexico, at one point just really felt called to France, of all places. You know, there's no Google, there's nothing, so he's praying for the millions of Christians there, not knowing that there's less than 0.05%. And one day they wake up at this point, so my mom and dad, they get married. I'm born a year later. We're in Mexico. My dad's in charge of a large church there, and they wake up in the middle of the night, and my dad gets this feeling: if we are not in France and the Lord comes back, we have not done His will. And so they went to see my grandfather, and they didn't know this, but my grandfather, I'm tracking back a little bit, had a vision of France, the map of France at a convention, and fell in a vision, in a trance. He was down for like 3 hours, and bawling his eyes out. And when he woke up, he explained there was this vision of the map of France for whatever reason. And as he was praying and interceding, he saw like just a cloud, a dark cloud, just cover the country. And the more he prayed, he saw these little lights flickering from beneath, till finally it illuminated the map. And when my dad came to his dad saying, "I feel called to France," he remembered that vision and said, "If you can be one of those lights, you have my blessing." Wow. Which, if you knew my grandfather, that was huge, because he was kind of counting on all his kids to just be there for him, with him in Mexico. So my family, my mom, my dad, myself, we came into France not knowing anything or anybody, and I was a year old.
You pretty much grew up in France since you went when you were 1.
Yeah, I've only been here for 10 years. So I came here when I was 34. So pretty much lived my whole life in France. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what your parents were doing in France, and did you have a part of it at all, like when you got older?
Yeah. So well, my dad started a church. They planted a church. And even kind of a crazy story. At that point, I was really young, but just finding a place. He was praying and walking through the streets of Paris, and saw this building in the middle of Paris, and thinking, this is an interesting building. Just felt led to go in. And as he went in, turns out that it was a building that was being foreclosed, and so they hadn't even put it on the market yet. And my dad said, "We'll take it." We reached out to supporters we had in the States and Mexico, and were able to purchase this whole building, and it was 2 floors. So there was the room for the church, and enough room for Sunday schools, and then an apartment for us. And I mean, it's not more than tripled. It's 10 times worth more what it was then. And so just right at the right time, they were able to purchase that building, and it's still there. And it's a church of about 150 people for a city in Paris, the city of Paris. That's pretty substantial. Growing up there, it was amazing. It was one of my best experiences. Just living right above the church, so being a part of everything, every single service. It's kind of interesting because as I explained, my parents coming from Mexico. They come to Paris, and the first convert is a Mexican. And so, started slow, and it was just, at first, it was just my dad, my mom, myself, my sister that was then born a couple of years later, and then this newly converted Mexican, and that's how we started our services. And what happened is, because of my dad's Spanish background, all of a sudden we're getting a lot of Spanish-speaking people. What you need to know is Paris is a melting pot of nations. Basically 10 years in, and me kind of growing in that church at that point, it's 30 different nationalities.
Oh my goodness.
And so we're, in a sense, we're reaching the world.
Yeah.
And, I got to meet all sorts of different cultures and nationalities. And, in the early stages, that church had a Spanish service in the afternoon because there were so many Spanish-speaking people. And that's kind of how we started. And so, every Tuesday night Bible study, every Friday night prayer, about, every 3 months, a whole night of prayer. It was just our lifestyle. That's the way it was. I only have fond memories. As I grew up, I saw the hardships of ministry, but my parents handled it well to where it never detracted me or discouraged me. Even when it went up to even having a split, just seeing how my parents handled it, and feeling some betrayals and stuff. It was, I think, things that I needed for later, but I saw also how to handle it. And so, so my dad was basically the pastor of this church, and it grew substantially. I think one of the fondest memories I have back in the day, and this is the 80s, so I think it was something that was normal. Maybe you don't do it as much now, but street evangelism. And so every Sunday we would go out after church and walk about 10 minutes away from the church to this place called Stalingrad. And it was like, again, a melting pot of nations. It was actually an area where there was a lot of drug addicts. And we would just sit there, 30 of us, and I was actually part of the mime team at 10 years old. So, the whole white face and everything. And sometimes it was really awkward because, I'm the youngest, and they would have me be the guy that's stealing a girl's heart, but that girl's like 5 feet higher than me. And it was a little awkward, but, I still remember the gestures, and my wife still makes fun of me when I mime it out. But it was fun. It was a great time. And then me and my sister at the time, handing out tracts, and a real boldness in a sense too, of just like, sometimes too much of a boldness. One of my best friends, when I was 8, I was so convinced he had to get saved that there was a conversation I had with him after soccer practice, and we're walking together, and I was a little too bold, telling him he's going to hell if he doesn't accept Jesus, that kind of thing, and even wrote him or recorded a tape for him very boldly, that I just thought, this is what it is to be a missionary, and just share my faith and let him know of the dangers. And thankfully, my parents caught that tape and never sent it to him. So that would have been really bad. But yeah, that's what it was as a missionary kid. Also, as I grew older in my teens, and we kept on going out in the streets, I loved playing the guitar. I learned to play when I was 8, and I would play at church every Sunday. I'd actually be sitting on the front and just watch my dad play, and just learn that way. And we'd go out in the streets, and I'd be playing with my knee on a chair and just start playing. And sometimes it'd be really cold. Paris it can be very cold and rainy. And so I remember this one time my hands bleeding as I'm playing, and I'm thinking to myself as this young kid, I'm just suffering for the Lord. Let's do it, and I just keep going. That's just my mentality, which has evolved since. But yeah, it was just that mentality of like, I'm a missionary too with my parents. That's how I felt. Yeah.
Felt very much a part of what was going on, and you were very participative. It was yours as well. It wasn't just you were participating with them. It was your heart in doing it.
And
awesome.
all my life living there, that's what I said. I always felt American. I mean, obviously you're like, really, you were in France, like you can't hear the accent. And that's because when you grow up and learn, you can learn up to, I think, 4 or 5 languages with no accent if you learn it before the age of like 4 or 5 or something like that. And so I grew up with both. When I was in a French school, in a French church, and then at home, everything's English. So I learned both languages simultaneously. And so for me, it was always, France is the mission field, and America's always my heart. I always had a heart for the U.S. That was, I felt American living in France, but I loved both. I really had a heart for both.
So you mentioned you have some crazy stories from that time of your life.
Yeah, well, aside from the bloody hands and there's this one time we had a ministry for the homeless, and every Thursday night we would offer food, just open the doors and they would come in, and it was a ministry. And so we lived above the church, so younger kids, and at the time the family is growing as well. I have 5 sisters and a brother now, so it started out as just me and my sister, but little by little we had these little blonde girls also being born. And so it didn't always feel very safe. And one of the harder times was just in the middle of the night, around midnight, and this homeless person is just banging down the door and like this close to breaking it, because it was like a glass door, and we had to call the cops. And so as a kid, that was a little bit traumatizing. Like, wow, so that's always left kind of a sort of PTSD with that, in that sense.
Yeah. So the people of France, do they have any opposition to Christianity, or were they pretty
Very much
open?
so. Yeah, very much so. It even I've learned a lot about France in those years by also hearing my dad's stories. And I there's a lot of my dad's stories that stay with me. And so one of the things was when he was praying about France in a Bible school in Seattle at the time before he moved. This couple came to talk about France. He was so excited. This missionary couple was like, "Oh, I want to hear all about it." And so excited as a 16-year-old. And this couple, the first thing they say to him is, the French don't deserve the gospel.
Oh, wow.
They said, we were there for 10 years and all we got was spits and rejection and everything. And my dad, thankfully at that time, instead of being discouraged, it motivated him, but not in a way of saying, if I can reap what the tears that they sowed. The way my dad explains it, they did reap, but they also did sow more tears. And yes, we did reach a lot of nations, but we also did reach some French people. But France, especially at that point, it's ever since the century of lights, it was just all about reason. It was very difficult to you had to almost like enter into an argumentative state with them to explain. And so of course you're counting on the Holy Spirit to convict them. But I know growing up in French schooling, so I homeschooled, and we might go back to some stuff, but I homeschooled, and then in my later teen years, I went back to the French school system, but also under like an international section. So I was still kind of set apart with a group of English-speaking students, but really got immersed in the French schooling system, the public French schooling system. And I remember some really very interesting conversations with some people just so anti-God. And I was never afraid of my faith. So they knew I was a pastor's kid. I wasn't ashamed of it. They knew that they wouldn't invite me to a party because I wouldn't go. But I wasn't also the dorky kid, that they'd leave behind. I'd play soccer with them. I got involved with so. And I think in a sense, being American made me a little bit popular too in that sense. So even though I was firm on my beliefs and everything, and my way of looking at it was like, well, I'm going to be firm on my beliefs and still be there for them, and that way they know they can count on me. I'm not just set apart completely. I want to be immersed with them. So I remember some conversations, and it always ended up with me. I could argue until I was red in the face, and then in the end, if it was like a group of people, I just look at that one person that I was trying to reach and say, listen, in the end, you're wondering if God exists. Here's the deal. Tonight, when you're in bed and you have no peer pressure, no one wondering, you're going to feel that emptiness in your heart. And I'm just saying, like, God wants to fill that. And that's kind of how I sometimes ended those conversations. And, I had a few friends that got pretty close to the faith. And, there's one or two that ended up coming to church with me. But it definitely wasn't like revival. It was a very, very hard ground. It still is, it still is very, very anti-God. I definitely, still think of that country, and I'm so glad my parents are there, and I have my sisters who've married now. Several of them are very much involved in churches around the country, and so yeah, the work is continuing through our family there. Yeah, with others. Yeah.
So are they mostly atheists there, or do they have other religions that they?
Well, atheists, and I would say over the last few years, very Muslim as well.
Oh, okay.
There's there's a city in the south of France called Marseille, and it's considered the northernmost part of Islam, basically. So there's sort of an invasion there. Again, I'm fast forwarding, but when I came back from Colorado, it happened to be the week of 9/11, and I remember, Paris before, and then coming in that week after, and the spiritual atmosphere was so different. A lot of fear. I had a really good friend that was Muslim, and I remember even that week he heard I'd come home, and even I was on high alert. It's like, hey man, come to my house, let's hang out. And he's kind of an interesting friend. He had he was like a swordsman kind of thing, so he had swords all over it, and I couldn't help but, like, what's going to happen to me kind of thing. It was a very, very, very dark when I came back. It felt very different. But at that point, I had decided to come back, and ended up staying 10 more years.
Walk us through that a little bit. So you grow up in France as a missionary kid, and you come to America.
Yeah, so I came to America really because I was getting in touch with my cousins. I had probably my best friend was my cousin in Mexico. Again, no Facebook, no YouTube, no nothing. So we'd actually record ourselves, like all the latest musics we'd been listening to. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Breakaway or Brio. It was this magazine for teens. That was my connection to the States. That's it. This magazine that I'd wait for every 3 months. And so with my cousin, we'd send each other tapes and stuff, and became really good friends. And he went to this internship in Colorado Springs, and I was like, man, this seems like so much fun. And what am I going to do after college? I didn't know. And at that time, my two interests were, of all sports in France, baseball. That's a whole other story. But I really got into baseball in France. It wasn't well known at all, but we had a lot of competitions and stuff. And then music, baseball and music. And through a very interesting moment where we thought we were really great at baseball. I really had these dreams and aspirations that I could become a Major League Baseball player, because we'd play against not just France. We'd always be like either first or second in France with our team, and then when we'd play against other teams, other countries, Italy, Holland, like we were pretty good. And then one day we played against a U.S. team, just a high school team, and they beat us 32-2 or something like that. And my dreams were dashed at that point. And that's basically, it's kind of interesting like how that worked out. But basically I was like, I'll never be a baseball player. So now what, Lord? And it's almost like I kind of like picked up music again. It's like, well, will it be music? And during that time I had gone, there's a few times where I went to the States or Mexico just to see family. And there was an opportunity to actually do an album, and it totally reversed everything. So my last year in France, I stopped baseball and consecrated myself more to school and music. And so then this internship seemed very, very attractive, and I decided to go. But what was interesting is music for me, and again, this shows how old I am, but it was more contemporary Christian music, DC Talk, Audio Adrenaline, these guys, not so much the beginnings of worship. I could tell the difference between singing songs at church and then this really cool music that I really liked listening to. Well, coming to Colorado, it was around the time that Matt Ridman had written Heart of Worship, and there was like this worship revival kind of happening, and I got hooked on that. It was like, man, because I was writing songs, but it was songs about God, and all of a sudden I can write songs to God, and that can also be a witness and a testimony too. And it changed everything for me. So those 2 years in Colorado really helped me develop, I would say, a worship lifestyle that included music, because worship isn't just music, but it included music very heavily. And it ended up it's what ended up giving me kind of like a desire to go back to France, to bring back something that didn't really exist, or so I thought. But during those 2 years I was in the States, the Lord had also been rising that heart up in France. And when I came back, like God connected me with a lot of people, including the brother of my future wife that I didn't know at the time. And we developed good relationships and toured with bands and stuff like that. And so that's one reason I came back. But to answer your question, being in Colorado, and even there, experiencing short-term mission trips, that was other crazy adventures there. But what brought me back to France, just one day, I'm thinking, okay, what should I do? I love what I could do through worship. I could go back to France. So, I'm very organized. I'm like, okay, France, but maybe I need to learn more. So, there's this worship school in Australia. There's this worship school in England. There's this worship school in the U.S. And I have all these options. And every morning with our internship, after working out, we would go to this prayer center, and it was beautiful. It had the glass all around that gave a view on the Rocky Mountains. Just beautiful. Wow. So we'd come there, 8 a.m., sun's rising and music going on, just pray and prepare our day. And that particular day, I get this vision. I see all these different faces, and specifically young faces. And I start crying, and I start praying for them. And then I ask the Spirit, like, who am I praying for? And it was just, the Lord said, the French people. That's all I heard. Wow. And so it kind of changed things for me. Like, okay, my next step is going to be coming back to France. Never thought that would happen. But that's I knew at that point, that's what's going to happen. And then when I kind of obeyed the Lord's voice on that, and he gave me like all these thoughts, like, man, you can really bring a lot with what you learned with worship. And then the rest is history, coming back and meeting different people and playing with different musicians, and really the Lord started opening doors for that kind of ministry. But then getting there, my dad was more than thrilled to have me, and so I became kind of the worship leader of the church and experiencing that. And again, I didn't know anything, never went to any worship school or anything, and just kind of learned on the field. And that was great, but my dad was like, there's something missing, Bryan. And he suggested something that I at first refused. He's like, what if you go to like a theological seminary? And you got to understand, because I viewed my dad as just an exemplary pastor, I could never fit those shoes. I didn't have his compassion. I just didn't see myself as a pastor. I kind of like steered away from that. No, I'm going to be the music guy, not the pastor. And so he tricked me by saying, well, you could go to theological seminary, Bryan. It's going to open doors for other pastors to open the door for you to come. If they know you've been through that kind of training, they're going to trust you more in what you bring. It's like, oh, okay, that's good. So I went through this to this theological seminary. Interesting, because it was very good for its content, helping me understand Bible context, history, and all that. But it was very spiritually dry, And so even when we would have our moments where we would worship and then read the passage of the Bible and stuff, they'd have me come, and I'd bring what I am, and then that wasn't what they're used to. They're used to actually playing the first few notes of the chorus, and now go, and it's like let's sing, just sing with me. And it wasn't so much like, let's worship together. So that was kind of a dry moment. And it's interesting how through dry moments, the Lord really birthed a lot of creativity. And I wrote a lot of songs during that time. So here and so here I am in this kind of desert season, really growing deep, and also getting very creative. But aside from every week leading worship at my dad's church, nothing else. And but it's like the Lord was preparing me with all these songs. And so then it's just meeting the right people at the right time, and that's what started happening. I met my I had found out about this worship leader who was actually really known all across France at that time. The Lord was really opening doors for him and stuff. And I was like, man, that's so cool. He had a CD out. That's awesome. I don't know if I'll ever meet him. But the Lord had these plans where one day I'm leading worship at a youth convention, and my friend knew him and introduced me to him, and he liked the song I had introduced that I had written. He was like, man, you should go with my manager team, and maybe you guys could do something. And so that was happening, and at the same time, more doors were opening, more on an amateur level of just playing for different churches and things like that. My friendship with him was developing, and then one thing led to another. I sent the tape, no CDs at the time, just a tape. That's how old it is, and no answer. And it's really part of the story, because what ended up happening is, so as I explained, it's kind of a funny story, but he came to me one day and was like, hey, so do you have anybody in your life? And the thing is over a period of 5 months, I kept seeing this girl. And I was, and oftentimes when I was leading from the stage, and I'm this single guy, and I saw this girl this one time, the whole light shining on her, oh, kind of thing, and I'm like, who's this person? And right away, that's how I was. Lord, could she be the one? And then like 10, 15, 20 minutes later, I saw this girl like be close with this worship leader, and I right away thought, oh, they're hugging. Or in France you have the whole two kisses. Oh, they must be together. Oops, my bad. Forgive me, Lord. Someone else is out there. That kind of thing. And it happened like 3 times. Every time I was like, I forgot, and then sorry, it was the same girl. It was the same girl each time. And so this third time, this worship leader that now I've become friends with, I didn't know much about his personal life. So that's when he asked me a question. Do you have anybody in your life? I'm like, well, no, but I see you do, man. Congratulations. That's great. Like, let's move on. And he says, I don't have anybody. It's like, what do you mean? Well, I'm like that girl that's always with you, head on your shoulders. That's not your girlfriend? No, that's my sister, dude. And so I was like, oh, this opens a whole new world. And so yeah, through music and my obedience of coming back to France, I met my wife of 20 years now. Wow. Yeah, and so we continued the mission because I ended up so her brother was this worship leader, but also training to become a pastor. So if you remember, that's something I did not want to do. And so he was very instrumental in showing me, hey, you could do both. And so I thought, oh, I could do both. I could be a pastor to help support the family and then focus on music. And little by little, he is like a lot more like, it's not so much about music. I want to pastor a church. I'm like, no, you're such a great worship leader. What are you talking about? So I had to wrestle with that a little bit. And kind of the crazy thing is I ended up saying yes through several circumstances in this movement to train to be a pastor. And it was in that year that I also got married. And so we moved to a city 3 hours away from Paris, and I became I trained under this pastor. I was the youth leader, I was the worship leader, and got just kind of helping out that church. But still very much wondering, am I supposed to be an actual pastor? Again, that was such a big title for me because of the example of my dad. And so I was still holding on to music a lot. And I still remember it was 2 years in, and I'm really questioning myself. I'd been reading a book, and you guys have heard of it. It's the life, the purpose-driven life. And all these steps were very clear to me. Everything from the beginning of my life, God has been leading me to this as a missionary, and I knew that it was ministry, and wherever it would be, doesn't matter. It became very clear in France. That's how you can actually support your family and be in full-time ministry. That's just the way it is. Otherwise, I would have to do what my parents had done and start, doing the whole missionary thing of furlough trips and things like that. But being a missionary kid, I didn't have that. I had my dad's friends, but I didn't have my friends that could support me. That's not how the Lord had led my path up till now. And so, living in France all my life, getting in touch with this church movement, them offering me to train me, it was just my decision. Do I want to be a local pastor? And so just seeing that I was having this thought of, am I going to be a pastor? It was a sacrifice. I said, okay, Lord, okay, I concede. I'm going to fully immerse myself in this. I guess music is not necessarily what you have for me. This dream that I had of, going around Europe and, being a blessing in this way, what I thought I was bringing back from Colorado and everything I'd learned. If it's a local pastor you want me to be, that's what I'll be. And there's a lot that I think I need to learn because I'm not there yet. Give me the grace for it, that kind of thing. And it was really crazy because the moment that I fully decided to do that week, the manager of that worship leader called me and said, hey, we're ready to do your album, by the way. Oh my goodness. And so it was like God taught me that lesson. It was like, hey, just be faithful in what I'm asking you to do, but guess what? I have both for you. And so it was really, really, really cool. And so ended up being the local pastor of a church, and also being able to go and for lack of a better term, worship artist, because it wasn't worship leader of a local church, but actually recording artist and everything. And so And at the time, again, no Facebook, no YouTube, no way of marketing. And so it was really God. I didn't try to put myself out there. I just said, I've developed friendships over the time. If they know I have an album now, if they want to reach out, they will. And basically, from the moment I became a pastor in 2007, pastor of this local church, to realizing that our chapter was closing, 2013, once a month, that I had that opportunity, and people would reach out to me. And so I was able to. There's not one month that I wasn't able to also have that heartbeat happen too. And it was actually very beneficial because sometimes if you stay locally, you kind of become very inward focused. And so by being able to go out once a month, I came back with a lot more passion, vision, fire for the local church. And it worked well. It gave us enough fire. It gave me enough fire, enough fuel to where, the Lord opened an opportunity for us to open plant another church 30 minutes out. And so we did that. And so that felt a lot more missionary work than this local church that I had. And so it was exciting to actually experience that too. So at the age of 27 to 30, that's what we're doing. My wife and I were in charge of this local church. And then this plant is opening. And so basically I was preparing 3 messages a week. A Bible study on Tuesday, Sunday morning at this church, and then Sunday afternoon at this other plant. And in retrospect, my biggest error of all was I did not know how to surround myself well, which is something I've learned since I've been here. And so I was young, so I could do it. I was doing it all. I was leading worship. I was preaching. I tried to develop some people to help out, but I wasn't good at it. And so I ran hard for about 7 years.
Trying to do it all.
Trying to do it all, and then I crashed, and the Lord was gracious and helped me finish well, so that when I finally came here, I was healthy.
What did that crash look like? Was that a physical illness? Was that just spiritual?
It was
low?
It was an attack. It was an attack. So being young and then going to all these different churches, I was always kind of bringing novelty, and in this city I was in, it wasn't Paris. It was 2 hours out in Normandy. A lot of a much older crowd, and I was at the same time youth leader. So then there's the leader, the youth are emerging in the church. Some of the older people who hold the tithe didn't like that, and so there started to be that kind of clash, which happens everywhere. It's not just in France, but it happens in France too. And so there's this clash happening, and it's a little deeper than that. So that I could leave once a month, there was another pastor that would come in, and it turns out this pastor had aspirations to kind of take over as well. And so I came to that point where I was physically tired. That is true, just from doing it all. But I came to that point where, thankfully, I'd learned, maybe because of my missionary years as a kid and watching my parents, to know how to let go. And so I didn't want to abandon, but I referred to the leadership of that movement, saying, hey, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong, but I do need help. It could be that I'm realizing now I'm doing everything on my own, and I need help in learning how to build a team. And this pastor that was supposed to help me has not helped me with that. And I also have a feeling that he's kind of wanting to take over. I feel like it's not very healthy, but I really want you to come in and see, and I want to submit to anything I'm doing wrong and how I could change. And that was the heart. My heart was that. And at that point, I have no other place to go. This is where I'm going. So they come in, and after talking with several church members and observing, they came to the conclusion that no, this pastor has to leave. We want to help you and equip you, but it's true, you do need a team around you, and that's just normal. That's human. It's no wonder you're having a hard time. You don't have anybody, so we want to help you with that. And so for a year, they helped me build that, and it was getting really exciting. And I'm thinking, okay, this is great. This is what I'm supposed to do. Meanwhile, because it is part of the story of the missionary story, my wife is feeling more and more called to the United States. It's her calling. She's French, and it was really hard for me being a missionary kid. Like, no, the mission field is France. I remember even going to Canada, because Canada is French speaking, and this worship leader there, who kind of toured all of France and knew him really well, he asked me this question. He said, "Hey, if money was not an issue, if whatever you decide to do is God's will, what would you want to do? You know, and he was like, and I was like, man, doing what you're doing. And he was touring all over. But that dream changed once with my family. I had a child. Like I was going to be more local, but I just didn't know how that was going to look. And a little did I know, they actually were going to offer me a job in Canada to be a pastor in Canada. But that's how strong I felt about France, and even just being loyal to that movement that I was a part of. And I declined it, which at the time, you know, we were feeling pretty healthy, just not, we had a lot of blind spots. And so when we finally came back, and it turns out there was a lot of issues going on, and so I invited the leadership to come check it out, and they said, we just need to tweak some things, but you're doing a great job, keep it up. I was like, great, that's awesome. And my wife, again, one of the ways I would help her was, you know, let's go to the States. And so we'd save money, and that was kind of our vacation, which, you know, we love road trips. And so we would choose a spot in the States and just road trip. Well, this one particular road trip, we at this point we're aware of some hardships, and we're fighting hard, and I'm still thinking France.
Hardships were back in France.
Yeah, and so just France. I mean, that's not going to scare me, and we're gonna fight. I was going to fight, and because I wasn't fighting rebelliously. Like I was encouraged by the leadership of the movement. Hey, keep it up. And so like, sweet, let's do it. And this is very interesting how God calls and shifts, because I'm trying to be faithful in that. Come to the States, we're driving, and we get to Nashville, and I go into this Christian bookstore. And remember, at the time, once a month, I'm touring, teaching on worship, that kind of thing. It's my passion. I love it. I get to this bookstore, and I see just all the resources, and I just feel completely depleted in that moment. Like, I left from Colorado to bring something new to France, and just staying there, I haven't really grown. And you know, my heart is the U.S., and I'm seeing all these resources, and I almost like felt like the Lord was saying, just relax. You need to recuperate. And I was like, okay. So I look at my wife as we're driving up north, and I say, hon, I don't know how or when that'll happen, but it's not going to be when we retire, as we always said it would be. It'll be sooner than later. But I do feel like the States is going to be our next chapter. And so didn't know what that would look like. And I get to the hotel in Chicago, where we had driven all the way from Nashville to Chicago. And I open my emails, and I get this email of a person offering me a job as a worship pastor. I'd never heard of that term. I was a pastor, and I led worship all around Europe, and doing conventions and doing workshops and things like that. But I'd never worship pastor, that's kind of interesting. And I read the description, and to this day I remember just a complete 180. Like, this is what I've been created to do. This is what's making me passionate. And it was being a part of a team. That was a new thing for me too. Like, being part of a team. I don't have to carry the whole thing. Like, this is going to be incredible. And so we kind of started that road of, let's just do that, you know. And at this time, it wasn't at all in Pensacola. It was in Minnesota. That was the open door. It was the carrot that started everything. And so we started the conversation. Of course, I was in contact with the leadership back home. I said, hey, I'm going to fight. We're going to finish well, whatever you think is best, but let's prepare for who's coming after me. It won't be this pastor. Let's prepare for who's coming after me. And so that whole year, that's what ended up happening. There's a lot of other stuff that happened, a coup d'etat and everything within the church that made things go a lot faster. But all God's leading, really. But that's a whole other story. But it's part of missionary work. You know, I can guarantee that that happens with, and I'm sure you've heard the stories with missionaries, because as a missionary, you never feel completely as if you belong. And so, you know, a lot of times they make you remember that. And so that's what happened a lot. And so this whole idea of coming to the States started, conversations started happening, no open doors. It is part of our story. When this coup d'etat happened with this pastor and the council, against the advice of the National Council, you know, basically I had a choice, either to continue being this guy's puppet or, you know, enter into something else that God may have for us. And the Lord had provided a city 2 hours away where this church had been praying for a couple that might come, that would come in hard times, and they were saving money to be able to support them as they continue to minister in their church. Wow. And that's what happened. Is at that moment when I had no choice but to leave that local church, again with the covering of the National Council, basically that church had ended up splitting from that movement as a result because of this pastor, and it wasn't so much the people that church ended up splitting. It's a lot of people appreciated Helen and I, and so sadly there was a split that happened. That was painful, but we needed healing at that point, and so we were rescued by this church, and they provided for us. And that was the year before we came here, and it was a year of healing and restoration, to where I can say without a doubt, had we not had that year, we would have come in some bad conditions here. But that year really, it healed us, it prepared us, because the job that I was assigned was to lead the worship team. So it was preparing me for my next chapter. I just had to think about that. There was a big team. I was already getting a feel of what it was like to work with a big team. And so the Lord really prepared us for that. And just at the right time, I was asking around. At the time, I was sharing a lot with my uncle, who was the senior associate pastor of Harvest at the time, and just sharing with him. And he didn't have anything to offer me, but just, I'm praying for you. Continue fighting the fight. You're doing great. And until one day they needed a worship leader, and they said, "Hey, are you still looking?" I was like, "Yes, I am." And so that kind of became clear that was going to be our next season. So quick version of everything.
Yeah.
I love how you weave it all together. I definitely have questions about life as a missionary kid and just the impact there. But your internship that you did was a worship internship?
No, it was, I don't know how you'd explain it. It was almost like a leadership academy. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Church of the Highlands in Birmingham, because they're well known now. They started out with the same type of internship that they took from this church in Colorado Springs. And so now that internship doesn't exist anymore. But basically we were there really serving the church, but also learning a lot of great tools. I actually got a degree with Oral Roberts University through that as well. And so we got to go on short missions trips, which was really, really cool and interesting too. And I think helped shape a lot for me as well. And there's some crazy stories there for sure too.
Yeah, it sounds like it just really was a very formative time in your life. You had already gone through school and different things, but that really solidified in you that passion for worship, and
it really
gave
did.
you tools there.
It really did. That church was really kind of an avant-garde of worship. It's called New Life Worship, and the worship pastor that I ended up being under for a year was Ross Parsley, who does Integrity, and I know Integrity was here around this area. I think Mobile more so, and so I learned a lot from that church, and just how it's kind of like, for lack of a better word, more of a modern worship. It wasn't so much the old hymns singing church. Nothing wrong with that, but there's something about that music that just also kind of lifted your heart and your spirit, and made you feel like there was a more real and vibrant relationship with God, not just with the head, but also with the heart. So
I love just hearing how God has spoken to your family. I mean, just starting with your grandfather, and just that passion, and the Lord really just putting France on his heart, and just seeing those moments throughout your family line and your life, and the internship, what you went through there, going back to France, and even that difficult time, like how God prepared that one church. I mean, that's the weirdest thing to me. I don't know if but it was kind of like, wait, what? They were saving money for somebody who needed to come and be restored, who would also be ministering in their church. Like, that's
crazy.
Very specific. That's kind of crazy, but just seeing the Lord doing that, and how you were able to just naturally flow right into that, just knowing this is what God has for us right now. And
well, I think a lot of it is if I had been hardened or arrogant or whatever, like, none of that would have happened. And I think it's just an encouragement to anybody listening even on the mission field, you're feeling discouraged, like the way out is not to get even harder or more stubborn, but just humility. And Lord, I don't know everything, and I need your help. And I think what helped me too is understanding that our life goes through seasons. I mean, I can't convey how I never thought I'd leave France. Like, it was so ingrained in me that France is the mission field. And it was a breaking process to a kind of a strange breaking process, because when we started sharing with people in France, hey, we're feeling called to go to the United States, they're like, yeah, right, where? Oh, Pensacola Beach.
Of course you're called there.
So that was hard to explain, but that's truly how we felt. And there was an element of like also being a missionary to probably the most important thing in our life, and that's my wife and my daughter. At the time, it was just my daughter. You know, that's a mission field in itself. And one reason we felt called to come here and be a part of a larger team was also just we want to continue this kind of healing process, because 10 years running on fumes gets exhausting. And so we needed to find a place where we could feel safe with raising our family. And I love France. We haven't been back in 10 years, thankfully, and I wouldn't mind. And here's kind of the cool thing too, and I'm just kind of bouncing off of this, but it never leaves us. My wife's French, so we're always talking in French. She's always watching French shows. And she's American too. She's fully American. She got her nationality recently, a few years back, and but there's still that French in us, and you see it at the church, right?
We're being overtaken by the French at church.
Oh, really?
So when I first got there,
there are a lot of French people.
when I first got, it's crazy how many there are. Yeah, when I first got there, it's kind of cool. I was asked to preach, and I was sharing how my wife got her green card, which is a whole miracle in itself, and there was a guy in the room kind of listening, and he's like, French nationality. So he comes up to me and says, "You're French?" And we became really good friends. And this is kind of cool. He owned like a crepe stand at the market, at Palafox Market. And so I would go with Helen and kind of get that French touch and grab a crepe, till one day he's like, "Hey, why don't you work with me on Saturdays?" And I kind of weighed it. I was like, this would be fun. This would be a way to kind of bring back that French culture a little bit. And what a great way, because we're at the Rex. It's right in front of that market. What a great way to like point to the church, and and so I said yes, and basically it's been 8 years. Every Saturday morning, I'm making crepes, the kind of food I grew up on in Paris, and I get to have really good conversations with people as they're walking by. Some are visitors, some are people from that live here, and we just talk. They don't believe I'm French, because you don't hear the accent, so I sometimes have to like fake an accent. Say no, I really am French. So that was kind of cool, and he's still at the church there, and we get to talk in French at times. And then the other cool moment is Pastor Roger had always felt in his heart to open a cafe at the church, being downtown and everything. And we were kind of looking for who could take over, who could take care of that. And he's, himself being European in a sense, being in Romania for 10 years, like, I'd like it to have a European feel. And so I'm thinking through, and I'm like, man, how crazy would this be? Because I'm thinking of this one guy that I was friends with, and he was a pastor too. But he also, in France, it's very rare when you can be full-time ministry. So he was a pastor, but also the manager of Starbucks in Marseille, that Muslim French city. And I was like, okay, so I know someone. It's kind of a long shot. I don't know where he is right now, but he was in the same movement as me, and we were very close friends. I could check on him, and so Pastor Roger's like, yeah, do it. Turns out he, meanwhile, had moved to Las Vegas because his wife was American. And I said, hey, how would you like to, come and join our team as a pastor and cafe manager? And in the same way that I had heard pastor and worship, it was the same thing for him. Like, oh, that sounds amazing. Wow. And so, long story short, he's now the cafe manager. So I'm always talking French with him. So France has not left us in 10 years. It's prevalent.
Really really cool.
That is so cool. And just for those of you who might be listening that aren't from Pensacola, the Rex is the building our church is in. It's an old theater, downtown Pensacola, and right across is the market where they sell their yummy
so the
crepes.
It's all right there. Yeah.
So good. We're coming up on our time here, so we're going to start wrapping up. But you mentioned a crazy story on a furlough. Did you want to
I can
tell
end
that
with that.
one?
Yeah, I can end with that. It's kind of interesting because you'd think, oh well, it didn't happen in a foreign country. It happened in the U.S. But again, I'll reiterate that I feel like wherever you are, you're a missionary. And for me specifically, that's my perspective, because if you ask me where I'm from, yeah, I lived all my life in France, but I've always felt American at heart. Now I live in the States, but I have a real connection with France as well, with my family still being there, which is actually has been a really good thing, because it's almost like an identity crisis that has forced me to realize that we're not home yet. So that's helped me in my walk with God. Like, we are travelers on this earth, and so I've actually been very grateful for that background to understand that. But so this crazy story happened as I was 11 years old. We made this crazy furlough trip so that my dad could raise support, and so he had built a team, and so left a pastor back in France to kind of take over while we were gone. We arrived in Chicago, rented a camper, and toured the States in 9 months, 45 states.
Oh my goodness.
I can't tell you how many churches. There's really funny stories where we basically, from state to state in a camper overnight. So we would get from in one church in one state, drive, the next day we're in another church in another state. And it was almost like a rehearsed thing where, my dad would share about France, and I learned all the wonderful stories he'd share and the statistics. And then, of course, he'd have us kids stand up there and sing some songs in all three languages, because he was living in Mexico too. So we'd sing these songs, and I can still see it now, where I was the only guy, so I was dressed in one way, but all my siblings, they had the same wrinkle-free dress at every time that they wore, and I could still sing the songs we did in all three languages. It's buried in my mind. But towards the end of that trip, still in this camping car, we get to California, and my dad's excited to meet this one couple that they knew from Mexico. And so they have a child, and they're super excited. And after talking a while, we were supposed to go to Baja California, so past the border. And they said, oh, we'd love to come too, to see. What they hadn't told us is that their son was illegal, didn't have papers. So we cross the border, stay in Baja California for a week, and have a really good time ministering there. And as we're coming back up, we get through the Mexican border, no problem. We get to the American side, and this Mexican family's in the camper with us. We're not thinking anything, but this boy didn't have papers. And around that time, this is 91, there had been some some facts of some pastors smuggling Mexican boys across the border. And so they thought we were one of them. And so I'm 11, five sisters. My brother wasn't born yet. 5 sisters, and they're telling us we have 30 minutes to leave. And I remember even now, my parents saying, take whatever you want, like take what's most important to you. And I'm 11, and I had just discovered baseball, and I had collected all these baseball cards over the year, over the 9 months. And so that was my prized possession. I'm carrying my baseball cards. There's this picture where I'm carrying baseball cards. My mom's carrying any clothes she could bring, and a jug of milk. Of all things.
Why the milk?
And my sisters have Barbies or whatever, and that's all we had. And we had to leave everything. We never saw the camper again. My parents, 2 days later, were able to take as much out as they could, but they had only like 1 hour to do so. And the crazy thing is that family with their child, they had no problem. We ended up being stranded for 3 months in Baja California. The very next day, they walked across the border.
Oh my goodness.
So that was a very interesting experience as a missionary kid on a furlough trip.
Doing missions,
Doing
really.
missions,
Yeah.
doing missions,
Yeah.
raising support, but also witnessing, and part of missionary work is also implementing that mission heart to people. So that's what my dad was doing. Is like, hey, thank you for praying for France, but maybe you're called to the mission field as well. And so, that was a crazy story.
What did they think was going to happen without papers? Or they just
I don't know if they didn't think about it at that moment, and then it was like kind of too late. But they didn't tell us, and we were surprised. And dogs sniffing to see if there's drugs, and thankfully, we're young and completely clueless. My parents would have a whole other take on those 9 months. For me, as an 11-year-old, it was the greatest trip ever. Probably what gave me a desire to do road trips. Because that's very much what has defined my life since then with my family. We love taking road trips, but my parents would have a different take on it. But like the policemen were nice to us as kids. We still have, like, I gave them to my kids actually, these cards with the dogs that were like just like little trading cards of the dogs that were sniffing, and so I still have that memory. But no, it was definitely something I've never forgotten. But part of the missionary life, as a kid.
Yeah, well, that is crazy.
Very crazy.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. I learned a lot about you that I have never heard. I love the story about you meeting Helen. Helen's one of my best friends, so I was just picturing her in the whole story, so that's so cool. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Crazy Missionary Stories.
If you're listening on Spotify, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, do the same. And on YouTube, subscribe to us and give us a like. And of course, share it with your friends and family. We'll see you next time.